Hello everybody, welcome back to Alan Wall's Photography. I'm Alan. This is episode number 7 in our Lightroom tutorial series. Welcome back everybody. This is going to be a pretty busy session. This one might run a little bit longer than the others. We have a lot of ground to cover. We're going to be talking about the toolbar. The toolbar consists of a tool for cropping, a tool for removing spots, a tool for fixing Redeye, and then 3 separate filter tools which have a lot in common, but a few important differences. So we had better get started. Let's begin by talking about the crop tool. There are 2 reasons that you're going to want to crop photographs. The first is in order to improve the composition. If you didn't get everything exactly the way you hoped in the camera, and you need to reshape the actual size of your photograph to improve the composition, that's one reason. The other reason is, of course, to end up with a photograph of the correct dimensions, whether you need it for an Instagram post or to put on your Facebook page, or if you're going to print it on your printer, you need to have the image in the right size. So let's get into the crop tool. You open it by clicking on the crop tool in the toolbar, which is right under the histogram, by the way. And it's called the crop overlay, and the shortcut is the keyboard R. So when you click on it, it'll open up. Let me show you how it actually opens up, because I have changed it. There we go. When you first click on it, it will open up with your entire image, the original image as shot, with a classic rule of thirds grid overlay. Now the first thing is that you can change that overlay. If for a given photograph you want to use something different, like diagonals, triangles, the golden rule, the curly spiral staircase snail overlay, or if you want to look at actual image crops, the standard ones that you're most likely to encounter, especially when you're printing, or a grid. So they're all available just by hitting the shortcut O. You can change which grids are available in the toolbar at the top. That's the very top toolbar. I don't think you can see it on this screen, but under Tools, there's a drop-down menu for crop guide overlay, and down at the bottom is cycle grid. Choose the overlays to cycle. If you click on that, you can pick which overlays you want to show and which you don't. It's pretty straightforward. Let's get back to where we were. Again, shortcut O. Now, there are a couple of things that will help you to get your cropping done accurately and quickly, one of which is a bunch of presets that Lightroom puts in there for you. If you go over to the crop and straighten window that is opened up when you hit R or opened up the crop tool, you'll see on the right next to the padlock, is the tab Original. Now if you click the drop down menu, it will allow you to pick from some pretty standard crop dimensions. These are mostly for printing, 8x10s, 5x7s, and so on. And you can choose what you want from there and just click on it. And if I decided I wanted this as a 1x1 square, I could click on it. Now, I can resize this by grabbing a corner, or in fact by grabbing a side, but it will continue to be a square. In other words, the aspect ratio won't change. You can change the aspect ratio by unlocking the padlock. You just click on it. Now, when I change the dimensions, it isn't linked to the other vertex. So let's go back to where we were. Let's put that back at the square. Now, you can also use the crop tool to straighten out your picture. if you have a photograph with a horizon, say, that isn't straight. Let me cycle that to something else so I can see the horizon. You can take this angle tool, click it on your horizon, stretch it out, and release it, and it will correct that. It'll make the horizon 0 degrees for you, or in this case 0.07 degrees. Let's get back to where we were. So the aspect, as we are talking about, is the actual relationship between the width and the height of your photograph, and that will depend on what you're going to do with the photograph, of course. So knowing what you're going to do before you start cropping is very handy. The artistic part of the cropping is a different matter. Now, you can set your aspect ratio first, and then let's shrink this down just a little bit, and then you can grab the photograph. You're not actually grabbing the crop overlay. You see that stays right where it is, but you can move your photograph around to recompose. Generally speaking, that's the quickest way to do it. But you can also do it the other way around. Let me show you what I mean. I'll reset that to the way it was. Let's say I particularly like the idea of using this kind of overlay guide. What I can do, I would unlock the padlock, and then I can zoom in and move the overlay to where it gives me the artistic feel that I want, which let's say I wanted this for whatever reason. Then I can, when I'm happy with the composition the way I want it, then I can go into the custom aspect ratio and change it for my needs. Say I wanted to print this off as for a screen, say 1280, well, 1920 by 1080 for an HD screen. I would just clip on that, and it would give me the closest approximation that it could. And of course, I could then size it up a little bit, move the picture around. But that's the other way to do it, is do the artistic part first and then make it fit your screen. And that is about it to cropping. The next tool in the toolbar is the spot removal tool. What spot removal is an automated clone stamp, if you're familiar with tools in Photoshop. What you do is select an area and ask Lightroom to replace it with a part of the image that will fit well with what you're trying to cover. Sometimes it does a good job, sometimes it does a terrible job. I'll be honest with you, most of the time for photographs that I am planning to print in large format, I do most of my spot removal in Photoshop. I think it's a little quicker and a little bit more accurate. But for basic spot removal, I think we can usually do pretty well with Lightroom. Now, when you click on the spot removal tool, your cursor will change to a brush, and you can change the size. You can feather the brush, which means you're increasing the area between the inner circle, which is with no feathering, and the outer circle, which is the outer limit of the feathering. Notice that the feathering is an effect that comes in from the outside. It does not spread around the spot that you're removing. So the edges of your paintbrush are still the actual edges of the effect. That's important to know. The opacity just means what it says. When you remove a spot, whatever you place over the top of it, if you want to completely remove the spot, this needs to be set at 100%. If you have it set any less than that, there will be a ghost of the spot still visible. So generally speaking, I leave that at 100. Depending on what I'm doing, I leave my feather really you get a softer transition with the larger the feather. So depending on what I'm working on, I'll either have that very high or all the way down to 0 if I'm actually trying to cut out a particular object very accurately. In this case, we'll just leave it on 89. And what I'll do is simply paint over my spot, and Lightroom will remove it. Now, if I want to see, I can already see Lightroom has used this piece of greenery right next to the spot to fill the gap. If you hit the letter H, it will unhide both the source and the original part of the photograph. So these black dots show what I removed and what was replaced. And if I don't like that, and I don't because there's a repeating pattern here that kind of jumps out at you, I can take this, the fill-in stuff, and go somewhere else. Say, pick there. And then it will use my new selection to fill in the gap. And then if I hit H again and hide that, I can see, and I think that's much better than it was before. So that is spot removal. It works also for much larger elements that you want to remove from a photograph. Now, when you're in the spot removal tool, you'll notice that you can't navigate around the photograph, because when you click and drag to move around the photograph, you just start painting spot removals. So you have to hit the space bar. That'll turn your cursor into a hand. You can grab the photograph and move it wherever you want. Now, I picked this photograph because of these cables. Obviously, they are something I would want to take out of the photograph. So again, I would use the heel tool. I may make the brush a little smaller. You can make the brush smaller with the square brackets. The left bracket makes the brush smaller, the right bracket makes it larger. Or if you have an iPad, a MacBook Pro like I do with the touchpad, 2 fingers on the touchpad up and down will adjust the size of the brush. And again, it is just a matter of painting what you want to remove, let Lightroom figure out what it wants to do, and it'll replace it. Now you'll notice it isn't getting it all, as is sometimes the case. Just go back and remove any parts that remain, and it'll continue to modify the photograph until you've got a spot removal that you like. Now, you can also use the forward/ key. Well, let's unhide the dots. By hitting the /, it will instruct Lightroom to select a different spot, and it'll keep selecting different spots until you like what you get. By the way, the / keystroke will show you the before you started and the where you are now images. So that is pretty much all there is to spot removal. It works pretty well. Doesn't work as well as similar tools like the healing brush tool in Photoshop, which I think is quicker and does a better job. So if I had to remove all of these, which I have done with another copy of this photograph, I did it in Photoshop and was much happier with, I think I would be with the Lightroom tool. But it's there. It's great for skin blemishes. Just be sure to use lots of feathering, and yeah, experiment. Works well. Don't forget the shortcut H to hide your previous work. All right, Redeye. Unbelievably, I could not find a picture of a human being with Redeye in any of my files. I don't use on-camera flash, and I don't shoot people with long lenses very often, and that's the magic formula for getting bad red eye. And I don't do it, so I don't have a picture to show you. But fortunately, I have one of my daughter's dog's portraits here. This was just a snapshot at the holidays, and you can see the doggy equivalent of human red eye. It's not really the equivalent. Red eye is a photograph of the magnified retina through the lens in the eye, and that's why it's red, because of all the blood vessels. With pets, there's actually most domestic animals that we keep in our houses have this membrane behind the iris that reflects light with this odd greenish color. But the tool for removing green pet eye and red human red eye work exactly the same. So let me show you how that works. First of all, let's close the spot removal tool, and we'll look at I can't remember this guy's name, so I'm going to get in all kinds of trouble for that, but persist, I will. Click on the red eye removal tool, and it'll give you the option of removing red eye or pet eye. In this case, I'll click pet eye, and from that point on, everything else is exactly the same. When I move my cursor onto the image, it gives me this reticulated pattern with several handles on it. What I need to do is place the dot right in the center of the eye, and then make sure that those handles, I'll increase the size of the pupil with the slider. You need to make sure that the effect covers the entirety of the iris. So your tool needs to cover the entire eye. You have a button that allows you to add or remove a catch light. It's pretty cool, actually. I think it hides the effect a little bit and is nice. With red eye, you can also darken the color. That you can't do in pet eye because it's giving you the maximum darkness anyway. Hit enter to accept the change, and there you have it. It's pretty straightforward. Red eye works exactly the same. Let's see, that's it. Okay. So the last three tools I'm going to treat as a group because their functions are pretty similar. It's just the differences will be obvious when I show you, but the actual function of the three tools is much the same. We have a graduated filter, a radial filter, and the adjustment brush. All of these tools place a filter, or I should say place a mask over your image. Now you know what a graduated filter is. This is a graduated filter. I just happen to have one handy. You can see that part of this glass filter is stained. It's some kind of fancy process they use, but it drops the exposure by whatever number of stops. This is a 3-stop soft graduated filter, meaning that 3 stops of light are blocked with this part and none with this part, and it's neutral density, meaning it shouldn't change the colors of your photograph. It just allows you, this by the way clips onto the front of your camera, so that you can position this on the horizon line in such a way that you can darken the sky, leave the ground undisturbed, and therefore narrow the dynamic range of your photograph so that you don't blow out highlights in the sky or end up with hidden detail in the land because of the shadows. So this tool does that for you right here, and if you click on it, it gives you this X as your cursor that you can click on your photograph and drag, usually depending on what you're trying to do, over the whole film, image, or part of the image. You can grab the outside lines and you can concentrate the effect in a much shorter part of the photograph, meaning a more sudden transition from whatever effect you're going to put on. Before we actually apply any effects, you can also grab it and move it. Before we add any effects, let's just look at the mask by itself. The shortcut is O, and when you hit O, it will show you where the effects that you add will take effect. And you can see from this graduated filter that as I manipulate parts of it, I can change the amount of a given effect. And this is where the effect would occur. These parts, the clear parts, are masked off. So it's not exactly the way you would normally think. You'd think that this must be the masked area. No, this is the area that is unmasked. Remember that. Now, let's get out of the graduated filter and pop into the radial filter for just a second. This works exactly the same way, except there appear to be a whole bunch of previous filters that I've used here. Let me reset all of that. Okay, so there's a reset button at the bottom of the filter dialogues. You can reset any work you've previously done. That's what's wonderful about these filters, is they're non-destructive. You can do crazy things and then come back and reset it and you're back to your original photograph. So for the Radial tool, you just click and drag to create an ellipse that you can then place over part of your photograph. And in this case, just like with the graduated, the area that is clear, the area that does not have the pink masking, is actually the area that is being masked. So any effects I applied with this filter in place would apply to the whole picture except for this area here. If I reduce the feather, you'll see that that area will grow and the edge becomes sharper until you get something looking like that. So this is the mask. This is unmasked. Now, for the radial filter, I find it more intuitive to invert the image. So there is a button for invert at the bottom that will essentially flip that the masking around, so that now it is the tree in this case that is going to be affected by the changes that I make in the effects panel and not the rest of the picture. Okay, and very similar to that, let's reset that and go to the brush tool, the adjustment brush tool. Again, it's exactly the same. You do have a choice of different brushes. These are presets. You can set them up any way you want. I usually use brush A as a large, soft, high flow brush. By the way, you can adjust the size of your brush with 2 fingers up and down, just like with the other tools, or with your square bracket keys, right for larger, left for lower, or with the slider right here. The feathering is up to you, but for one brush I like to have a lot of feathering, meaning a soft transition, and then for my B brush I usually like very little feathering, so this is a much sharper edge tool. And I leave the density at 100 most of the time. The density, by the way, is the maximum amount of an effect that can be applied, and you can set this wherever you want it. If you like, for example, to have a hard stop on how much saturation or texture or clarity you can add to a photograph, you can change this density slider to prevent you from adding too much. I like to layer effects onto photographs, so I usually keep the density pretty high but keep the flow lower, meaning each pass of the brush adds a lesser amount of the effect so that I can build the effects up. All the same basic stuff with any brush you use in editing tools. Okay, so with the brush, let's go back to my softer brush. I can simply apply my mask by painting. It's that simple. Now, when I apply a change, let's say I remove all the saturation from the area that is masked, and then hit O to turn off the overlay that shows the mask, then I've turned the tree and parts of the sky around it black and white, grayscale. And I can restore that with the slider, and I can oversaturate it with the slider. See how it's affecting the area that is unmasked, but it's not doing anything to the sky except where I overbrushed on the edges. So that's my point, is that these three filters are different tools for giving you the same effect. Sometimes dealing with skies, it's much easier to use the graduated filter and a lot less messy than trying to paint the sky with the brush. But for objects that you want to apply an effect to, the brush can be easier. And for all kinds of things, the Radial Tool is very handy, because let's switch back to the Radial Tool for a second. And we'll zoom out from the picture. The Radial Tool, so with the Radial Tool, we can make our effect almost a straight line. I mean, we can use it much as we would, turn on the overlay, you can use it much as you would a graduated filter, though different. There's no limit to how creative you can get with these. You can turn it on its side, you can do whatever you want with it. Grab the handles to change its size, move it around. So the tools are very flexible, and how you use them will largely depend on your personal preference. Let's reset this, and now I'm going to give you an example of how, let me make sure I've removed it. I hit H to unhide any filters that were active, and there are none. So let's take this photograph and do something with one of the filters. Let's start out with the graduated filter. Let's say, first off, let's reset the graduated filter. There we go. So that took anything that was in there out, any previous settings. By the way, double click on the word effect in the panel and it will reset all of these sliders to 0. Now, if we take our graduated filter and drag it down from the top of the sky towards the bottom, if the letter O is pressed, that'll show us the mask. So we know that the effect that we're going to apply is going to apply only to the top part of the photograph. Now, in this case, let's say we want to make our skies bluer. Okay, this is the part that's affected. We can turn off the overlay so we can see what we're doing. And then by sliding the contrast, it will increase, the saturation. It'll increase the saturation towards the top of the photograph and add less and less saturation towards the bottom. But it's kind of saturating the tree. I don't want the tree saturated. I like the tree the way it was. So in this case, what I can do along the top where the tool gives you the option for a new filter, or edit the current filter, you can also brush. Now this is super handy. When you click on brush, it turns your cursor into a brush, and you can then apply that brush to either add to your effect or erase parts of the mask. So in this case, all I would have to do is paint over the tree, and it will add back the mask that we put on to increase the saturation in the sky. And if I hit O, you'll see that I'm erasing the pink, meaning I'm leaving the photograph under the mask so that the effects that I want in the sky won't affect the tree. This is a very, very cool tool, and it comes in handy in a million different ways. Anyway, you get my point. I won't do all of this, but there we go. And then when I overdid it right there, but I'll show you we can fix that too. When I turn the overlay off, now you can see the sky is horrible actually, but it is more saturated and the tree is back to where it was before. Okay, so now we know how to apply each of these three masks, the graduated filter, the radial filter, and the adjustment brush. Let me show you with a very, very simple image how useful these things can be. Hey, here's a good example for spot removal. Let me grab my spot removal tool here and make the brush bigger and paint over this thingy here. Well, that didn't do a very good job. Let's see why not. Let's hit H to unhide. Well, I think the problem here is that I have some feathering. If I remove that feathering, there we go, it will, using the same piece of the sky, it will do a much better job of hiding it. So that's all there is to spot removal. Let's go to the graduated filter and let's apply a filter from top to bottom. And let me show you what each of these sliders can do. And this is exactly the same as in the basic panel. You know, in the basic panel, I was explaining to you that all of the changes that we were making were global changes. You were making changes, it was affecting the whole picture. That's what is so beautiful about these particular filters is it's not going to affect the whole picture. It's only going to affect the part of the picture that you want it to affect. Let's hit O to turn on the overlay so we can see where the effects will be. Now, there are any number of things that you can do. I could, for example, drop the color temperature. Now let me turn the O off so we hide the mask and see the effect. So by sliding the white balance slider, dropping the temperature of the photograph, we can make the sky as blue as we want or as orangey as we want by going the other direction. We can even change the color of the sky using the tint slider. If you were looking for some kind of odd effect for a creative purpose, then you could do that. Exposure is exactly as it sounds. You can increase or decrease the exposure, and notice that it is only affecting the parts of the image that are covered with the mask or uncovered with the mask. Contrast, exactly as you would expect. Same with all the other sliders, and they work precisely as you would expect them to do from the basic panel. Texture, clarity, dehaze, these are all identical to the ones you'll find in the basic panel. Saturation is another way to add color to the sky, but I think you're a little safer using the temperature slider. Get less banding. I can actually see some banding in this. All right, the 4 at the bottom are worth mentioning. Sharpness is acting pretty much exactly the same as the sharpening tool in the basic, in the detail panel. This is the amount slider, basically. Of course, in this picture, it's only going to add a little bit of sharpening to the edges of this thing that are under the mask. Noise is actually noise reduction. As you slide to the right, you can remove noise in the parts of in the unmasked parts of the photograph. Moire is a change that it's something that the anti-aliasing filter in your camera causes to happen whenever you have a photograph with a lot of repeating lines or dots. It can create this strange pattern as your camera tries to fill in information that isn't there. This will help reduce that by sliding to the right. If for some reason you wanted more, you could slide it to the left. Defringe is handy. If color fringes start showing up as you're applying these masks, you can remove it by sliding to the right. Probably one of the most powerful tools in the whole program, in my opinion, is the ability to finesse your selection using range masks. Now, this is a little bit more of an advanced tool, but it is so powerful that I think it's something that you're going to want to know about. So let's go with the brush tool. If we pick the brush tool, and let's say that we want to lighten up the kite and add saturation to its color, but leave the sky the way it is. We can take the brush tool and we can, let's make it a bit smaller, and we can paint. Let's hit O so that we can see the mask. We can paint over all of the parts of the kite, just like so. And there you go. All you have to do is press O to remove that mask. And now, what did I say we wanted to do? We wanted to lighten it up, so we'll hit the exposure. Uh-oh, well, there's a problem. It's increasing the exposure of everywhere that my brush went, and I don't want that. I just want the kite to be lighter and more saturated. So how do I get around that? Well, that's where these tools at the bottom come in so helpful. Now, Auto Mask kind of can do this, but it doesn't do it nearly as well as doing it manually. And let me show you what I mean by that. At the bottom is this option for range mask. By default, it's off. But if you click on the drop down, you can either use color or luminance. Now, in this case, I could use either because every part of this kite is darker than the surrounding areas. So that would be one way to do it. Color would be another, because there is nothing black or purple in the photograph except for the kite. We can do it both ways, but let's start with color. So we pick a color range mask. Now, if we take the paint dropper, yeah, that's what it is, paint dropper, we can now select the colors that we want to use to refine this mask. So we can either pick individual points, the black and the purple, or we can hold and drag a rectangular selection that includes all of the various colors. Now, when we do that, we can adjust the amount of that effect to where the effect you're adding is not added to anything that doesn't fall within that color range, or if we were to do luminosity within that luminosity range, which means now when I go back up and and increase the saturation or bump up the highlights, the exposure even higher, it's only affecting the now refined mask. So let's reset that and go back and do the same thing with the luminance. It's exactly the same. So everything is reset to normal. We'll grab our adjustment brush. We'll paint over what we want. And it does not have to be accurate. Let's hit O to see what it looks like. Okay, it's about what we had before. That's fine. Now, instead of applying changes that are now going to affect the sky as well, let's go to the bottom, turn the range mask on, this time for luminance. Now, we can take our dropper. Let's turn the mask overlay off. We can do the same thing we did before. We can select a rectangle which pretty much covers all the range of luminosity within this whole kite. And this is even better because it gives us sliders at the bottom that will allow us to adjust the excluded luminosities. Let's turn the overlay back on and I'll show you how this works. As you slide the right-sided slider to the right, it's going to place the mask over lighter and lighter areas. We need to lower that until it's only over the blacks. This means if we did the opposite, if we slid the left-hand slider to the right, the effect would grab more of the surrounding areas and less of the darks that we're trying to select for. So I would definitely drop the right slider until the mask is only over my kite. Very narrow range, you can see. And now when I turn off the overlay, I can go up to my effects and I can add my exposure and it will brighten just that range of luminosities. I hope that makes sense. I think this is really where Lightroom shines. The ability to do this kind of very accurate editing is incredible. So, man, that's really about it. I didn't think we'd get through all of this in one session, but if you have any questions about how these tools work, or if you would like to see a video just dedicated to how one of these tools can be used in different settings and different circumstances, let me know. I'd be happy to do it. Really, the best way for you to do it is to just jump in and start experimenting and see how powerful these tools are for adding localized editing effects that can really make a huge difference in your photography. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, we'll be back with video number 8, I suppose, is next. And I can't remember what we're going to be talking about, but it is going to be fascinating. Guaranteed. Have a good week. Stay out of trouble.